Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I'm back to talk about some of the books that I've read recently. I'm currently filming this on the 11th of September with the knowledge that because I went to London last week, I didn't really get a chance to film my August part 2 wrap up. But of course we are getting very close to mid-month in September as well. And you know, the amount of time that it takes me to film, edit and upload videos means that by the time this video would go up for my August wrap up part 2, that we'd be well towards the end of September, which would then mean that my September wrap up part 1 would be delayed, and it just felt like a bit too much of a mess. So instead of doing 2 separate wrap-ups, I'm going to do a big combined one for everything that I've read since my last wrap-up up to today, the 11th of September, which will mean that my part 2 wrap-up for September is going to be a little bit longer, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. That's just a big complicated, convoluted way of me telling you that you're going to get an extra long wrap-up now. So no more of my rambling, let's just get into the books. The first book that I finished since my last wrap-up was The Lockin by Phoebe Luckhurst. This is a contemporary romantic comedy in which we are following 3 housemates who on one Saturday morning end up getting locked in the attic. This is the 3 roommates, Ellen, Alexa and Jack, and then also Ben, who was Alexa's date from the night before. The 4 of them are scrambling to be able to get out of the attic. Meanwhile, the plumbing has gone completely haywire downstairs and the flat is starting to fill up with water. And while this is all going on, the other housemate, Ellen, is trying to work out where it is that she recognises Ben from, because she is pretty convinced that they've met before but can't tell how. This was one of my anticipated releases because I do like to have a little bit of a chick lit rom-com every now and then, and it certainly satisfied that craving. It's not one of my favourite by any means because it is, as much as I like to have a slower paced book, I did find this at points to be a little bit too slow and a bit too packed with extraneous details that we didn't necessarily need. For what actually goes on in this book, I don't think it needed the full 370 odd pages. I feel like if you currently are sharing a house at the moment, especially if you live in London and you're used to London landlords, there'll be a lot of chuckles had at this book. This definitely made me feel very grateful for my current living situation and the fact that my landlord is a lot nicer than this one. At the same time, I did find a lot of what happened in this book very predictable, and because it was so slow, that did kind of dampen my enjoyment. I definitely say give this a go, but it's more of a 3-star for me. Next up, another bit of a rom-com was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Another heavily anticipated book for me considering how much I loved Red, White and Royal Blue, also by Casey McQuiston. This is set in New York City and follows the main character of August, who has just moved there. She's trying to find her feet, work out where she belongs, alongside a very eccentric cast of characters. She's moved into a flat with 3 other roommates who are very quirky and very fun. She's not really expecting her life to be that interesting, but then she goes on the subway one day and falls head over heels in love with a woman that she meets on the subway. However, very soon August starts to realise that there's something a little bit odd, and that weird fantastical something is that Jane is originally from the 1970s. She has stayed the age of 24 since the 1970s and she's not been able to get off this subway since then. And then suddenly, as the threat of subway maintenance becomes an issue, it's a race against time to kind of work out how it was that June got trapped here and how on earth they're going to be able to get her out. All the while August is falling more desperately in love with her. And I know the common thing that people are going to ask is this as good as Red, White and Royal Blue? For me personally, I think I still slightly prefer Red, White and Royal Blue. That story just very much got into my heart and has taken up residence in there. It's going to be quite hard to displace that story. But this I also found really enjoyable. I think from reading this, it's been really interesting to kind of pick out the quintessential Casey McQuiston writing characteristics. Something I would say is that if Casey McQuiston were a fictional character, they would probably be Lorelei Gilmore, because all of their characters are very fast talking, very witty, very intelligent, all a bit eccentric and quirky, but very lovable. I really enjoyed how this book dealt with these themes of identity and memory and grief. Alongside this feeling of identity, this emotion of feeling stuck wherever it is you are, how universal that feeling can be. I would say in comparison to Red, White and Royal Blue, this does get a little bit more steamy, a little bit saucier, which at some points I felt like I wanted to put the book down, not because I felt like very prudish, but because I just felt like it wasn't very hygienic to be having sex on a subway. And I was just like, oh god, where's the hand sanitizer? Mainly, I've come out of this book feeling like I really want to see a Casey McQuiston screenplay. Like, how fantastic would some of these stories be if it was on film? So yeah, very much enjoyed this. If you liked Red, White and Royal Blue, I would highly recommend it. Next up, rather poignant for today when I'm filming, because it is the 20th anniversary, I have The Only Plane in the Sky, The Oral History of 9/11, which was curated by Garrat McGraff. And I honestly don't even know where to begin with this. This, as the title suggests, is an oral history of 9/11, curating and compiling lots of different interviews and testimonies from people who were involved in the day. It includes stories and testimonies that are obviously taken in retrospect, but also does include recordings from the actual day itself. So phone calls, plane transmissions. I was actually listening to this on audiobook rather than reading it, and obviously the oral history works really, really well as an audiobook. But one thing that I found really, really jarring was that some of the audio that is included is actual audio transmissions from the plane, including moments where the hijackers are talking to the US airspace, and I found it so chilling to listen to. Another thing that I would also flag up for this is that obviously this can get very, very graphic at points, particularly people who were in the impact zones of the Twin Towers. It does not hold any punches about the horrible things that they ended up seeing, including injury detail and death. What I found really interesting listening to this were the overlapping testimonies and places where people would just say the same thing again and again, even for little details like how blue the sky was that day, how glorious it looked outside. The repeated assertions from people at the beginning of the day saying that they actually thought that the 11th of September was going to be a really easy day, that there wasn't going to be much going on. When the planes crashed into the Twin Towers, people on lower floors not actually feeling anything, not noticing that anything had happened until they saw people running. Later on in the book, they're talking to nurses and doctors at New York hospitals who were expecting to get a rush of patients, but as they got further on in the day, towards the afternoon, less and less people were coming in. Obviously, sadly, because people had not survived. And that, once again, was just chilling to hear. It doesn't just stop at recording the day. We also get a glimpse into how people's lives were affected by 9/11. And particularly something that really called out to me was the 9/11 generation. So adults who were children when it happened, kind of recalling what they remember of the day and how it's impacted their lives, which is something that I, as somebody who was 6 years old when 9/11 happened, could really relate to. For me, myself, like I said, I was 6 years old when it happened, but I do have memories of the day. But there's also part of me that thinks, would I remember much about the day had other people not told me to remember it? But I do have really clear memories of coming home from school and seeing my mum had set up the television in our kitchen and she was watching these images on TV, which was not something that usually happened. My mum didn't usually set up the television in our kitchen. And I knew as a 6-year-old something really important must have happened, but I didn't really know the extent of what that important thing was. There's one story in here about a young Muslim girl who was around 6 or 7 years old when 9/11 happened, recalling how her best friend had been told by her mother not to play with this young Muslim girl anymore, forbidding her to talk to her until this is all over, which I just thought was so devastating. And yeah, I just thought that this was a fantastic, fantastic book. It's one of the best, most poignant books that I've read this year, and one of those books where I feel like everybody should read this. Another history that I read was Queer City, Gay London from the Romance to the Present Day by Peter Ackroyd. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I am going to include this in my next installment of my super sexy history books videos. I was really excited to read a book that was the history of sex, but from an LGBTQ plus lens. Like I say, I'm not going to go too much into it, but unfortunately I found this a bit disappointing. And there was one aspect of this book and something that Peter Ackroyd says in this that I didn't really agree with, and it just really rubbed me up the wrong way. So for me, this was more of a 2-star read, but I will go more into it when I do that video. Next up, another history book, and apparently I did not want to give myself an easy time of reading this month, was The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for such a long time, and I'm so glad that I finally did. This is set largely in the 1910s to the 1930s and tells the truly horrendous story of what happened to the women who worked in factories painting radium dials before it was really widespread, the devastating effects of radium poisoning, documenting these women, the work that they did, and the horrifying effects of radium poisoning on their lives, and particularly how the companies that they worked for completely denied responsibility for the poisoning that they had, even denying that there was anything wrong with them, despite the fact that these women were dying. Once again, this is a book that does get rather grisly, especially for myself as somebody who finds it really, really hard to hear about dental issues, especially. It's a really weird thing. I'm absolutely fine hearing about like operations on the main body. I can watch plastic surgery shows, I can watch operations, I can watch like cesarean sections. Obviously I've never seen that live, but I can watch it on TV, no problem. But anything that is remotely to do with the mouth or the hands or the feet, I can't do it. I can't do it. If you get a cut on your hand or you're on your foot or anything wrong with your mouth, don't show it to me because I will freak out. And because of the ways that these women were actually told to use the dial paint, it included putting the paintbrush in their mouths. So obviously some of the first early signs were dental issues and jaw issues. And like I say, it gets truly horrifying. I don't even want to mention it because it'll make me feel a bit sick. This book is almost novel-like in its retelling, and I love the tone of it. Kate Moore has this like barely contained rage, which I think works so well with what's happening. It reminded me a lot of Unwell Women by Eleanor Cleghorn, but actually in terms of both of those books, I would probably give the edge to this because it is so much more focused on this one issue rather than like the long sweeping history of women in illness. And it's just so infuriating to read like the denial of these companies that there was anything wrong and that they were to blame. Reading about these 1920s attitude to industrial hygiene. One line that really just got under my skin was, "Are we an industry to help carry out some soft, silly social plan? Are we an industry to buy the goodwill of the employees? No, we are an industry because it is good business." This attitude of prioritising profit over the people that you are employing, it's really sad to say that not a lot has changed. Obviously, we have better hygiene practices now, but And I knew that I really loved this book after I saw a 1-star review of it that was talking about how repetitive this book is, saying, oh, it's the same thing that happens over and over again. It's doom and gloom on repeat. And that really frustrated me. It really irritated me. Because I just think that's kind of the point. The fact that it is so repetitive is the point. You are meant to be getting frustrated by the fact that these women are being denied justice at every turn. The fact that these women were continually pushing for their pain and their illness to be taken seriously and nobody was listening to them. The fact that even when these women did end up going to court, even when the women were successful, these companies would make appeals or try and break the rules of what they were meant to pay out to these women, trying to twist the law in their favour. And it is meant to be exhausting and repetitive. You are meant to feel frustrated. This book does a fantastic job in highlighting how ridiculous and frankly how evil these companies were being, prioritising their greed and their profit over these people and not owning up to their crimes. And quite frankly, if you didn't enjoy reading about it, then just imagine living it. That's all I'm going to say about that. Next up, we're getting into September books. And the first book that I finished in September was The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. This is historical fiction which is set in Pompeii in 74 AD. This is the first book in a trilogy and is focused in on one of Pompeii's brothels, and particularly following the women that were employed there, particularly the character of Amara, as Amara details her life living and working in these brothels, the horrifying treatment that they were subjected to, but also the female friendships that emerged, and really her fight as a slave to regain her freedom. I thought this was a really interesting book. I was originally quite concerned about how it was going to depict these women and the experience of living in this brothel. But I feel like this was done as tastefully as it could have been done. I was worried at some points that it was going to be a little bit gratuitous, or even worse, that it was going to use the sexual elements in a kind of titillating way or in a shock factor way, but I don't think it did that. I think it kind of walked that line very well. The focus of this book is less so on the plot and much more on these characters. It was interesting for me because I don't think I've ever read a book that was set in Pompeii, and I do wish there had been a little bit more of a vivid description of this world. A fun aspect of this book is that a prominent figure from Pompeii in this time period does crop up, but I'm not going to spoil that for you. I think what you go to this book for is for these characters and how they are depicted. I feel like most of the main focal characters in here are very well realised and nobody is two-dimensional. Even the characters who are horrible do have a little bit something more about them. They're not just villainous. You get to understand why certain characters are the way they are, and that doesn't excuse their behaviour at all, but it does help you understand them a little bit more, which once again is a really hard line to kind of master, but I think Elodie Harper did a good job here. I do think at points, because it is a slower paced book, it can be a little bit overlong, and I felt like the ending was a little bit abrupt. I feel like had I not known that this is the first book in a trilogy, I would have been a bit disappointed by the ending. I did get to the end and I was like, wait. What do you mean that's the end? So I suppose what this means is that I will be anticipating the second book very much. So yeah, if this sounds like it's up your street, definitely give it a go. I'd love to hear what you think. And then the last fiction book that I read this month was one that was a bit disappointing to me, which was The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I feel like this book has finally cemented to me that Diane Setterfield is not an author for me. I have tried to read all 3 of her books, The 13th Tale, Once Upon a River and Bellman and Black, and both Bellman and Black and Once Upon a River I got around about 100 pages in and then just gave up. I couldn't do it anymore. I thought this was going to be the one that I was going to really love, and I got most of the way through and then ended up kind of skimming the end of it because I just did not find this interesting at all. This tells the story of Margaret Lee, who gets invited by an old author called Vera Winter to tell her biography. However, Vida Winter is known for kind of spinning yarns and not being very truthful about her life. Her past is quite a mystery, so Margaret is not sure how much she can trust her. We're trying to get to the bottom of what happened in Vida's past to make her the way that she is. And I just found the writing in this to be very bloated and odd. I found the writing rather pretentious, but it has this air like it wants to be very casual and colloquial, and it's a weird thing for me. There are moments where I feel like Diane Setterfield is writing a line and then she's kind of stepping back and being like, that was good, wasn't it? And I'm like, I think maybe because I am not really one for writing. I go to books more for character and relationships rather than I do beautiful writing. So whatever she was trying to do with this, it just didn't impress me that much.
That don't impress me much.
I feel like I was meant to find Vida Winter really interesting, but the second that we met her, I thought she was so annoying. I found her genuinely very, very irritating, and I don't think I was meant to. I think she was meant to be like cool and mysterious, and I was just like, oh, for God's sake, every time she was on the page. I feel like these characters do not talk the way that actual humans speak. It's all just very pretentious. Maybe what rubbed me up the wrong way was one of the first things that Vida says is politeness. Now there's a poor man's virtue if ever there was one. What's so admirable about inoffensiveness, I should like to know? After all, it's easily achieved. One needs no particular talent to be polite. On the contrary, being nice is what's left when you've failed at everything else. People with ambition don't give a damn what other people think about them. I hardly suppose Wagner lost sleep worrying if he'd hurt someone's feelings, but then he was a genius. And I was just like, excuse me? I didn't consent to be roasted by Vida Winter, thank you very much. If I'm not unfailingly polite, who am I? So yeah, I think this has cemented that I'm kind of giving up on Diane Setterfield as an author. I thought we were gonna get along so well, but no, not for me, not for me. And then the last non-fiction book I finished last night, and it was Thomas Cromwell, The Untold Story of Henry VIII's Most Faithful Servant by Tracy Borman. I have been reading this alongside doing a re-listen to the Wolf Hall trilogy. My original plan was that I was going to read one of the books, then read the corresponding part of the biography, then go back to the next book and then do that, and vice versa. I think I'm around about 60% through The Moon and the Light at the moment, so I thought it was fine to finish this off. And I was so close to the end that I thought, fine. And yeah, I really like this. I really like Tracy Borman's writing of the Tudors. The other book I've read by her was The Private Lives of the Tudors, and I really like that this was a more focused look at one person. I really like The Private Lives of the Tudors, but I felt like this more focused approach worked a lot better for me. And I think this is a really nice supplement to the Wolf Hall series. If you really enjoy the Wolf Hall trilogy and you want to get a little bit of a sense of the history that Hilary Mantel was evoking, if you want to see maybe where she might have stretched some truths, maybe where she played around a little bit with the history, this would be a good place to go. I'm definitely up to reading some more Tudor history from Tracy Borman anyway. So there we go, those are all of the books that I finished in the last few weeks. Do let me know your thoughts about any of the books I've read today, and I'd also love to hear about what you've been reading recently. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye!